For more analysis, we're joined from Cairo by Dr. Mohammed Osman, International Relations Specialist, and Mrs. El-Amira Rasha Yusri, the Israeli Affairs Expert. Welcome to Q News. Now, start with you, Dr. Osman. Now, some Israeli analysts say that Netanyahu is unfit to lead the post-war phase. To what extent do you think that the war has weakened Netanyahu's domestic trust?
Thank you for having me, Hala.
Always a pleasure.
It seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu now is at a crossroads. Right now, he seeks to appease the US administration and the Trump administration. He also seeks to appease a growing demographic within Israeli society that has grown tired of the war. And this demographic includes the families of the detainees who demand an immediate stop to the war so that the detainees can be released, whether the dead ones or the remaining living ones.
Mm-hmm.
So now he faces a conundrum because, on the other hand, he wants to maintain the war without providing it with a definitive end so that he can retain his governing coalition at the moment, at least until the next election, because right now the far right represented is in the parties of the Zionist religious party of Smotrich, or the Itmuz Yehudit of Ben Gvir. Both have threatened several times that they will walk out if the war ends in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems now that Netanyahu is stalling the negotiations as much as he could, and at the same time, he's trying to capture as much of Gaza as possible so that he can create a certain reality on the ground that secure Israel's expansionist aims before any supposedly imminent ceasefire.
Okay. Mrs. Yusri, many Israelis see the war on Gaza as a national failure, yet Netanyahu remains in power. Why has there been no political reckoning, and how long can Netanyahu resist calls for accountability?
Well, let me first thank you for having me. The Israeli public is heavily divided. Some actually see that Netanyahu and his government failed to protect the settlements in the Gaza perimeter, and that Israel was exposed to a grave incident that created a mistrust between the government and the people. And in spite of that, the people hoped that to be led by Netanyahu and to restore or bring back the detainees and to bring them home. Netanyahu used force and bombed Gaza south and north to prove to the Israeli public that Israel actually has this power to destruct, and in spite of all that, he wasn't able to bring back any of the detainees by power. This makes the Israeli public perceive this failure or these operations to be a utter failure, and these operations did not pay their fruits to bring back the detainees or to end. Um, and in the meantime, the far-right government led by Netanyahu tried to expand the war and even carried out assassinations in southern Lebanon and bombed Lebanon to market these as victories and wins. And in spite of that, the Israeli public did not see those operations as wins or gains because the detainees were not back. He expanded the conflict to also include Iran, and the Israeli public is still seeing these operations as failures, but the far right is able to promote these operations as wins. And the more of this vision that these are successes, or in other words, these failures were also accompanying with wins, because we see the far right taking the majority of the Israeli Knesset, and that's why they are still there. The dilemma here that the Israeli public do not see these operations as wins, and the detainees are not back till this moment.
Dr. Osman, with Netanyahu facing domestic pressure and international scrutiny, particularly over Gaza and Iran, some fear that regional instability may happen if he falls. To what extent is Netanyahu's continued leadership a liability for regional stability and ceasefire initiatives?
Definitely, Netanyahu as a person is quite the liability in the path of any de-escalation in the region. However, Netanyahu is not the root cause of what is happening. What is happening, its root cause is the arrogance and the expansionism of Israel. Israel retains a certain worldview that it seeks to exercise some form of regional hegemony with US support so that it can exercise absolute superiority over the entire region, whether her opponents or even countries she is at peace with. And of course, this also entails a complete liquidation of the Palestinian cause, the opposition to the two-state solution, and the idea of displacing the Palestinians out of their remaining homeland. This is something that is endorsed across the board in Israel. All the political parties and all the political actors do support the idea of liquidating the Palestinian cause and oppose the two-state solution, whether on the Likud, Lapid's coalition, Benny Gantz's party, the far right, of course, the religious far right. Everyone is against the two-state solution now. So the problem is with the political class in Israel and how they see things and how they have become a bunch of warmongering fanatics, basically, unfortunately, even the supposedly moderate ones among them. And what's even more destructive in this context is the unconditional support they receive from the United States, especially under the Trump administration. If you remember, Hala, the latest press conference a couple of days ago on the dinner table between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, it was horrific. 3 times when the question was presented to President Trump about the two-state solution or Gaza or Iran, he referred the answer to the Israeli Prime Minister, meaning, and the message behind this is that you go ahead, Netanyahu, go ahead, Bibi. You can answer the question because we have an identical stance on such issues. This one on the two-state solution, which they oppose, and was on the idea of relocation, forced relocation of residents of Gaza, and also on the prospects of negotiations with Iran and the possibility of resuming the war at a later stage.
Exactly. Mrs. Yusri, now some Israeli reports suggest that Netanyahu's position would be more vulnerable if the Gaza war ends. Why is the continuation of war seen as a survival strategy for Netanyahu? And this was also reiterated by Dr. Osman, that Netanyahu is trying to maintain the war raging so that he would maintain his position and avoid the collapse of his government at the same time.
All the parties to governance in the Israeli society sees that when Netanyahu talks to the Israeli public, he speaks to promote the far right and to promote his own party, and he does not talk about the problems. He showcases successes as the far right did that, and so. But the reality on the ground, the citizen feels misled by the government. These are false successes. They are artificial for Netanyahu to remain in his position. and for the far right to stay in the government. If the far right was part of this coalition and now rejecting a deal till this moment, and they are saying that a deal with Hamas will be insulting to Israel. And in spite of that, Netanyahu says that there are talks and he's seeking a deal with the war continuing. One of the most important points that Netanyahu mentioned and Steve Witkoff mentioned that there has been an agreement on 3 points of 4 between Israel and Hamas, and Netanyahu still does not want to pledge to end the war. He only wants a 60-day deal, and for it to include negotiations over, for it not to include negotiations over a permanent ceasefire, so that he can keep killing Palestinians and leading the so-called successes. Of course, it's a fragile position, but the strong far-right coalition is strong, and if Netanyahu leaves, the coalition will remain. All the entire strength falls with the far-right coalition, even if Netanyahu is not there. Everyone participating in this war and is lost, their families directly turn to side with the opposition, and that's why the far right is losing now. There are ideas that now being promoted within the Israeli society that by the far right that they will be able to annex more land or to occupy more lands in complete violation of the international law and international humanitarian law, also to human rights, and it is seen for the entire world. Let me tell you that the Spanish foreign minister said that there must be actions rather than words. So far, the international community did not take a strong position to stop the starvation being waged against the Palestinian population in Gaza. This morning there has been attacks and people fallen killed due to shooting and starvation together. And the entire world that we believed in its thoughts and ideas regarding human rights and freedoms, today they see that this country holding such tragedies to a certain population is actually something they can be silent about, and all of that is in the interest of the far right coalition, and it's supporting the temporary ceasefire or a temporary deal.
Yes. Dr. Osman, back again to you now. Several international rights groups and Western countries condemned Israel's war crimes in Gaza under Netanyahu's leadership. How might these condemnations affect Netanyahu's standing on the international stage if the war continues?
Well, I can be an idealist and tell you, oh, it will tarnish his reputation, or I can be a realist and for the first time they have committed numerous war crimes over the past 70 years or even more, and no one was held accountable. So now, because of the sheer size of the crime, there's a public outcry in civil society circles and in human rights circles. However, that does not mean that anyone is willing to take any concrete action against Netanyahu in decisive and influential Western circles. If anything, Germany is a member of the a founding member, that is, of the International Criminal Court. And of course, it ratified the Rome Statute. That means that the court has jurisdiction on German soil. Yet, and Germany, with its slanderous record with genocide and the Holocaust and everything, they always claim that they are the ones who adhere the most to international humanitarian law and international human rights law at this point. However, when it comes to Israel, that does not apply, because Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor of Germany
Yes.
said that if Netanyahu decides to come visit Germany,
He will not be
the
arrested.
exactly the arrest warrant will not apply, and it will not and we will not arrest him, either he or any other Israeli official. And if anything, the International Criminal Court itself is now being subjected to a witch hunt by the Americans, sanctions on the prosecutor and the judges and the workers. So it's rather farcical, really. It voids the international system out of any moral meaning, unfortunately. So I don't think that it will present any substantial pressure on Netanyahu. And by now, how many people have died in Gaza already? We have about 57,000 documented deaths, in addition to about 14,000 missing.
Yeah.
So we are speaking about probably 71,000 dead. The actual death toll could be much higher, but whether it's 70,000 or 300,000, it doesn't matter, because at a certain point, numbers do not matter anymore. Joseph Stalin, the former leader of the Soviet Union, once said, the death of one person is a tragedy. The death of 1 million people is a statistic. And unfortunately, we are approaching this reality right now. People have gotten used to the bloodshed and are getting used to the continued existence of a vile person like Netanyahu on the helm of power in Israel.
Yes. Mrs. Yusri, now some people suggest that Netanyahu remains in power to avoid legal consequences. To what extent do legal fears, not national interest, drive Netanyahu's refusal to resign?
The legal pursuit, we hope for it actually to pay off, but everyone who threatened preventing food or fuel to enter the strip to be legally prosecuted by the international community is not carrying out what it should be doing. We see the head of the major state in the world, the United States, calling the Israeli judiciary not to prosecute Netanyahu. He is supposed to be the head of the largest state in the world, the most powerful state, and he's a man of peace, and that he should be doing everything to prevent the war. And even in spite of all that, he cannot see all the violations. We wait to see the international community holding those who committed war crimes accountable. If the most powerful state in the world calling for a national judiciary not to carry out with legal prosecution, how can we wait for him to respect the International Court of Justice that already condemned the former defense minister and issued an arrest warrant for him? Will any of that happen, or is it just a picture? We see the world condemning here and there, but in reality we cannot see any actions. And for the Israeli internal affairs, the army and the government should be forming a fact-finding mission, such as what happened in 1973. There must have been a change of the ministers. You changed the Minister of Defense and Foreign Affairs. There must have been the fact-finding mission that not of the army or people affiliated with the government or with any conflict of interest with this issue. That must have been a non-biased fact-finding mission to determine where is the failure, where are the vulnerabilities and weakness points. Most of the committees formed from inside the army released some pictures and facts saying that there were failures.
Yes.
Those who will be held accountable. So far as long as the war is going, there will be no true legal prosecution. and any investigation will lead to the fallout of the government, and that's why there weren't any such investigations, and that will not happen except after the end of the war. We will never know when will the war end. We only hear statements about 60-day agreement. Will the war resume after or not? And what are the guarantees that Israel won't strike back after the 60 days? Will they carry out with the displacement scheme? All of these questions must be answered, and the Israeli failures that will take down major officials led on top of whom Netanyahu himself, they will need to say that they eliminated terrorist elements to justify their positions, to compare their losses to their gains.
Dr. Osman, now U.S. President Donald Trump called for Israel to cancel the corruption trial of Netanyahu or grant him a pardon, describing the trial as a witch hunt. How does U.S. backing, particularly from Trump, as we mentioned earlier, affect Netanyahu's domestic legitimacy, if there is any?
Other than the fact that what Trump is doing is basically eroding whatever is left of rule of law inside Israel, and if the Israeli judiciary or president reciprocate to such with such American calls, it will basically be a complete unraveling of the justice system inside Israel. And also, I think that why Trump is pushing for a stopping or an end or a cancellation of the corruption investigation and trials of Netanyahu, he's trying to incentivize the idea of stopping the war in Gaza, even if not permanently, then for a prolonged period, in exchange for the release of detainees and hostages. And in return for that, he can get some more leeway by having his political troubles and his legal troubles, I stand corrected, dealt with, basically, with the help of the Americans. You know, it is rather absurd what things have come down to. Netanyahu has been on trial for the past few years, way before this war has begun, on account of him engaging in illicit and corrupt activities along with members of his family and his associates. So I don't see how this would feature into reinforcing the idea of rule of law inside Israel. However, we can care less about that. What we care about is what's going on right now. Trump is trying to prop up Netanyahu politically, which means he will be stronger, which means there will be much less pressure on him. And even if we reach a 60-day ceasefire in the coming days, I sincerely hope we do, because it will at least partially alleviate the suffering of the people of Gaza. That does not mean that we are looking at a definitive end of the war, as Steve Witkoff might hope. I think the Israelis are very serious about finishing what they have begun in Gaza. They want to liquidate or at least simmer down and reduce population presence inside the Gaza Strip.
And take over the entire Strip.
Exactly. They already control about 65% of the Strip. They want to control 75%. We have heard Israel Katz, the Israeli defense minister, speaking about establishing a so-called humanitarian gated city in southern Gaza, presided over by pro-Israel Palestinian militias, a bunch of mercenaries and traitors, and that's exactly what they are. And from there, they seek to move 600,000 Palestinians in the first stage. There's 600,000 Palestinian displaced in al-Mawasi camp. They want to move them to this new humanitarian gated city, which they will not be allowed to leave, and where they will be processed for the so-called voluntary departure, which is of course...
So it's a prison, in a way.
It's a concentration camp, Hala. Remember the concentration camps?
Yes.
Hitler put the Jews and the Roma in, and the Soviet POWs. Now the Israelis are creating a new concentration camp inside Gaza to imprison more than 100,000 people in its official stage, in its initial stage, and overwhelmingly, they want to imprison 2 million Palestinians in this concentration camp in order to more easily deport them to third countries, and all with the under the auspices and with the agreement and
of
the
the
consent
United States.
of the United States. We should never forget that.
Yes, yes, particularly President Trump. Well, that was Dr. Mohammed Osman, International Relations Specialist. Thank you so much, Dr. Osman, and Al-Amira Rasha Yusri, the Israeli Affairs expert. Thank you so much, Mrs. Yusri, and thank you for being with us and giving us your valuable insights.